So, are the humanities on the cusp of a renaissance? This may seem like an impossible, even ludicrous question to entertain right now, given the state of the humanities, because within the academy and outside of it, the humanities, that is, the studies of literature, art, and culture, philosophy, are embattled on all sides. But in this video, I want to discuss how they got in this position, where they should go from here, and why the humanities might actually see a renaissance very soon. First, let's give a fair assessment of why the humanities are in decline, especially in the universities in the US. Both the political right and the political left are partly to blame here. The political right and left have done much to weaken the academic study of the humanities over the past 4 decades, maybe longer. From the right, conservatives and neoliberals have pushed universities toward a business model, vocationalism, by seeing education as job training. Tuition at U.S. universities began to rise significantly in the 1970s and especially throughout the 1980s. And while college costs had been increasingly modest since the 1950s, mainly tracking inflation, the rates of increase accelerated dramatically after the late 1970s. So this is the beginning of what many historians would call the tuition spiral that's continued ever since. So what contributed to this? It's mostly the direct cause was a decline in federal and state funding for higher education. After the 1960s, when public universities were heavily subsidized to make college more affordable, states began to reduce appropriations per student. So in response, universities compensated by raising the tuition. And this only got worse under Reagan. His era, 1980s largely, is often seen as the period when these trends became entrenched ideologically. So before his presidency, as governor of California, Reagan pioneered the model of cutting public funding to higher education, and he had reduced tuition to what had previously been a nearly free state university. So several universities were, in fact, free. Many of the state ones were until his time. He criticized the University of California system for being too free, for harboring leftist activists, and his policies began the long-term transformation of public universities from the public goods to a consumer commodity. So Reagan's administration embraced free market, anti-government intervention policies, which reduced federal spending in many areas, including education. The underlying idea was that individuals, not states, should bear the cost of their own education since they were the ones who benefited from it personally. The private good argument here. And as state funding for university education was increasingly cut in the 70s and 80s, the cost of tuition began to rise significantly at this point. Disciplines without a clear economic utility, like the humanities, were deemed wasteful, at best quixotic, producing Don Quixotes as they were going out into the world, and completely delusional. This is the idea, the fiction of the humanities, thanks to the right. Okay, from the left, many humanities disciplines have turned from studying the true, the beautiful, the good, to analyze structures of power and promote a kind of scholarship that was really just a political activism. And this happened during you could probably place it right at the late 1970s too. So you have these two things happening at the same time. So from the left, the humanities absorbed this wave of continental theory. And in my field of the humanities, literary studies, you see Foucault, Derrida, Lacan, Marxist cultural theory, and other theories that provided excellent ways, actually, to think about literature. I have nothing against theory. What I'm against is the predominance of theory as the exclusive orthodoxy that gets to push out all other kinds of perspectives. I think we need theory, but we need a diversity. We need other things too. So post-structuralism and critical theory, I think, really did yield helpful insights. Their dominance, however, reduced literature and art to political symptoms. And you started to get dissertations and books about literature that weren't actually about literature. They were about the colonial or the patriarchal or the capitalist or otherwise. And they suddenly the Academy wasn't really interested in the aesthetic or the formal or the spiritual or moral inquiries. And so criticism became a political diagnosis rather than an appreciation and evaluation of literature. And so the ideological left became the new orthodoxy in literary studies. I'm speaking from my own limited experience in the study of literature in the US. And this often determined admission into programs, job placement on the market, etc. So as the right restructured the university into a market-driven, money-driven, tuition-funded managerial institution, the left in the humanities retreated into sometimes jargon, discourse on identity and politics, which risked losing touch with the broader structural fight for public education and the common good. So they're really fighting each other at this point, and the humanities are suffering. So what's interesting is that both sides during this period eroded the spiritual essence of the humanities, spiritual nourishment, human flourishing. These are things that are very hard to commodify, and it's also hard to weaponize for the political reform that the left wanted. So both extremes of the political spectrum lost interest in the humanities. Both sides now risk forgetting that the humanities exist to form human beings, not just moneymakers and activists, to cultivate imagination, empathy, wisdom, and moral discernment, and to help people find meaning and beauty in life. Isn't that what it's all about? I can't think of a better reason for the humanities to exist. Close reading is so important to this channel, and I often say, if you can teach someone how to closely read and find meaning in a poem and beauty in art, then they're exercising the same faculties that will help them find beauty and meaning in their own lives. And this is something that Walter Jackson Bate wrote about as well. So erosion from both sides wore down the humanities, which are now no longer celebrated as a shared moral and imaginative education for the public and spiritual life. So that's what's happened in the Academy. Now let's talk about what's happened outside the Academy and the public. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the Academy, while all this was going on within, among the broader public, literacy goes into decline. Literacy is in decline. Now, depending on how you look at it, you can at least say that I think proportionally fewer people read. There's this disdain for the humanities that's growing in this anti-intellectual side of the right now. And among young people, some students find it difficult to complete books at all. The reason might be the smartphone and addiction to short-form content, but actually I think the cause is much deeper. A tool of unprecedented access to the great works of literature and philosophy, the smartphone, is commonly used as a tool of passive entertainment. It can be used for great things. And by the way, this affects the poorest among us. The poorest are suffering from this addiction to the smartphone. Studies actually show that the negative effects of smartphones are disproportionately hurting people of lower income households where quiet spaces are scarce and abuse, anxiety, and depression are more common. So of course you're going to be seeking escape in any way you can, not in books but in smartphones. And there's some research by the Pew Research Center that supports all of this. You can see my recent post on my Substack where I talk about this. But all around us in public fora and on social media, the art of dialogue and civil dispute continues to disintegrate. AI threatens to outpace human intellect and creativity as people are constantly outsourcing their writing and thinking to these machines. And for those who care about the life of the mind, it seems as though the humanities are receding into irrelevance. So the situation is bleak. I'm not denying that. But despite all this, and perhaps because of it, the humanities will see a renaissance. We've seen this pattern before. History suggests that such moments are preludes to a renaissance. And this idea that a new renaissance could be coming is simmering in circles as broad as cultural, literary historians and philosophers, along with esotericists, including some of the commenters on my YouTube channel. So more recently, Jared Henderson concluded a recent interview by suggesting that renaissances and enlightenments follow periods of darkness. And he's also writing about these issues on his Substack, so if you don't already, check that out. From a completely different field of knowledge, an astrologist friend of mine is convinced that the renaissances and revivals actually follow Pluto's transit into Aquarius, which happens every 250 years. The last time it entered was, around the French Revolution or the American Revolution. And Pluto just entered Aquarius, permanently about this time last year. So this is not to endorse, all of the varied contexts in which the word Renaissance is used. This is merely to say that a real Renaissance in the humanities may be brought to a boil soon, and if it does, it will happen faster than it ever has happened before, and it's probably going to happen outside of the academy, because nearly every Renaissance has begun either under the conditions of collapse or shortly after some kind of cultural exhaustion and the loss of meaning. And I think at this point in our post-Nietzschean moment, we're pretty much there. And like the European Renaissance of the 15th century, the next will come from outside the academy, I think. I'm currently reading the letters of Ficino, who's this Italian Renaissance translator who introduced the writings of Plato and Neoplatonism and the Hermetical texts to Italy and the Latin West at a time when the academies were corrupted and embroiled in their own tedious debates. His Pera University model, the Florentine Academy, which is really just a kind of study group, very glorified one, an amazing one, but it helped initiate the revival of learning during the Renaissance. And in fact, the state of the universities, right before the Renaissance then, in Ficino's time, resembles our own today. Medieval universities were locked in Aristotelian scholastic logic-chopping debates all across Europe. The major universities of Paris, Padua, Oxford, etc., were dominated by a form of stale scholasticism which focused on commentary traditions and the reconciliation of Aristotelian philosophy with Christianity, mainly by Thomas Aquinas, who actually was brilliant. But at this point, there's a kind of staleness there. So by the 14th century, Aristotelian logic and the commentaries of Aquinas were dominating the university faculties. And so the portrait of the medieval academy is not unlike our own right now, wherein the humanities have fragmented into subfields that bicker with one another in specialized jargon. The older ideal about the conversation about meaning, beauty, morality, freedom has been replaced slowly by the political infighting that I described at the beginning of this video, and is also eroded by performative scholarship and tribal academic discourse that exhausted and wearied public interest, and many within the academy itself. Another scholar who was working outside the university, who helped start the Renaissance, you might have heard of him, Petrarch, was something of a wandering poet scholar. His famous letters to Cicero show, I think, an attempt to revive ancient wisdom through more personal encounter, not through academic commentary. Mirandola is another person who broke out of the academic specialization and announced, the 900 propositions that tried to harmonize many fields of knowledge: Hermeticism, the Kabbalah, astrology, Plato, Aristotle, Christianity. All of that was happening outside of the academy at that time. So if you examine the characteristics of cultural renaissances of the past, you'll find that many of them did follow hard upon a sort of cultural exhaustion, and people began to find meaning outside of the academy. Something like this happened with the Islamic Golden Age in the 8th century, which followed the collapse of the Umayyad dynasty. There's the Paleologan Renaissance of the 13th and 15th centuries, which helped transmit the Greek inheritance to Europe. It was a cultural rebirth in the wake of collapse. The European Renaissance, which I just mentioned, 14th, 15th centuries, was partly initiated by the fall of Constantinople in 1453. So when the refugees of Byzantium fled west, they brought with them into Italy the ancient Greek texts that the Byzantine scholars of previous Renaissances had kept alive. So the introductions of these new texts helped loosen this pedantic and academic grip on universities. Even the Romantic movement of the 18th century and 19th centuries was largely sparked by a cultural disruption by the Industrial and French revolutions. Romanticism contained all the major signs of a cultural, creative, and intellectual revival, and so in a way it is its own Renaissance. But in each of these instances, renewal of the humanities did not arrive from the academic institutions. In most cases, the academy was a hindrance to these movements until it was reformed. And the revival came really from exiles, from readers and translators, extra academic and para-academic educators, and small circles of studies that reimagined what the humanities could do for society. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And so speaking of a new Renaissance, I'm suggesting that the very signs that we take as symptoms of collapse or decline, such as technological disruption, institutional distrust, cultural anxiety, may very well be the early signs of a renaissance. So looking closer to our own moment, I see this already happening. There's this revival of the humanities and more to come. Our culture is already exhausted by AI content. And after the generation of students who ChatGPT'd their way through college and high school, once they arrive on the job market, once society is saturated with people who cannot publicly speak or write or dialogue, and once the effects of intellectual passivity and mindless entertainment are fully felt in the next decade, if not being felt now, the world will look again to the humanities. If it is able to look anywhere at all, it will look there. And when they do, the universities who survived this nadir are going to be the ones who have fought against gatekeeping and participated in the revival. And some departments within universities are already responding correctly to this. There's a recent one which just came up from Harvard's Arts and Humanities Division. They just launched the Public Culture Project, which aims at addressing cultural disintegration through public conferences and podcasts that really center the relevance of the humanities to our current crisis. Well, that would have been great 10 years ago, but it's great to have it now. Other programs like Rutgers Public Humanities Initiative, the Public Humanities at Yale, NYU, Steinhardt's Project for the Advancement of Common Humanity, and many other projects are going to help reintroduce the need for the humanities in public discourse. They're trying to build a bridge between the academic study of the humanities and the public need for it. So this is a good sign, I think. In a few years, instead of seeing the humanities as weapons for political ideologies and culture wars, or suspect by the anti-intellectual right, I think many people, I hope, will see them for what they are: a tool for building a more just and democratic society, and as an instrument of human happiness and flourishing. Until then, what comes next in the few years will be refining fire. So we'll see how this video ages. Thanks for watching, and until next time.